Nissan has decided the time has come for the Infiniti Q models to go, and they will not be producing this model, the Q60 that you see behind me, ever again. So let's give the Infiniti Q60 a proper send-off, and we close a very important chapter for this model. Let's roll. When it comes to the Infiniti brand, I have a bit of an emotional connection to the brand itself, because when I first arrived to Canada, the Infiniti G35 was one of my first cars in this country. So I have that history and the emotional connection. You see, the G35 at that time, still to this day, was a very popular model. It had an amazing engine, it came with a 6-speed manual transmission, it looked amazing at that time, and it still does in some ways. So the G35 kind of started this story that brought the Q60 and also the Q50. The VQ35 made it possible for this community of fans and tuners to come together and make it possible for Infiniti as well to bring new models into this Q lineup. The G35 is technically the founder of this model that you see behind us. And then we moved on to the G37, which came out in 2007. It was sort of like the new VQ was born, the VQ37. Both G models got a few facelift until 2013, when the successor of the G37 came out, the Q60. This time we had a different name for the coupe and the sedan. We had a Q60 and a Q50. The launch had received mixed reviews. First, because it had a different name. Second, because Infiniti decided to kill the 6-speed manual transmission that was offered in the G35 and of course the G37. And now we had a different automatic transmission, and also the born of the VR30. The first model to come out was actually the Q50, the sedan. And then in 2015, 2016, Infiniti introduced the Q60 that you see behind me. So this car has been pretty much almost the same since 2015, which is quite insane to think about it. It's a long time for a car to just pretty much stay the same. Now the difference is that the car has received some sort of facelift, a little bit of an update on the interior and some exterior. The package they came with was a 300 horsepower V6 twin turbo, and then you had the Red Sport, which is technically the one that we have for today's video. They made 400 horsepower. Most of the G35 and G37 models were technically naturally aspirated. This was the first twin turbocharged engine, and it also came in all-wheel drive. So Infiniti was trying to compete with the Germans at that time. Let's not forget that the 2015 Mercedes and BMW, the M4 in this case, made only 425 brake horsepower, which was not far off in comparison to this. The problem is that, unlike the Germans that continued to innovate and make the cars more powerful and of course update and facelift, Infiniti got stuck in time. They weren't able to produce anything different until 2022, which began a new era for the VR30. Now we have the 2023 Nissan Z, which also uses the same engines that you see on this Q60. And they listened to the fans by bringing out a 6-speed manual transmission, something that wasn't offered in the Q50 or the Q60. Even the Ford Mustang in 2015 made only 435 brake horsepower. So the car itself, the specs, weren't far off in terms of competition. The Problem is that while everybody else was trying to figure out to make the cars faster and better, Infiniti didn't do that. And that's another reason that this thing potentially is going to be the last of the Q models. Now let's talk about this car specifically, the design. Even though it came out somewhere in 2015, 2016, to this day, in my opinion, this car feels new. The lines are amazing. Let's look at like the front end, the grille. Then we have the headlights, that aggressive look. To this day, in my opinion, this car really keeps up with the current model very well, like the new Germans or even the Americans. We got the side profile as well. Again, very amazing and futuristic in some ways, not totally outdated. And then we go into the rear end, we got a single exhaust on the side. This one has the AAM performance exhaust because the owner believed that it was time for this thing to receive some sort of upgrade because it didn't sound as good stock, which I don't disagree with. And that was one of the problems with this car, is that it didn't sound great for an engine that made 400 horsepower out of V6 twin turbo. Then we jump into the interior, where everybody loves to complain about. It is outdated. In some ways, yes, everyone is used to that new infotainment display and cluster being a full massive screen. This doesn't have that. It does have two screens, in fact, in the center. One is used for the maps and one is for settings and your climate and so on that you can play around. But the cluster, for example, is still very much the same as the previous, well, the first model that came out. In this case, a little screen in the middle and analog overall. But it's still, in some ways, it still provides that premium feeling that you'll find in new models. Like, for example, if you had to compare it to the new Acura TLX, although Acura doesn't have a coupe, it does have a sedan, the interior on this thing is not too far off. It's still touchscreen, you're still getting an Android Auto and Apple CarPlay as well. You got a 360 camera, which is not the highest quality, and I understand that, but it's still there. And the good news is that you can pick up a used one for like under 50K with good condition. Like you can get even for 40K. In fact, Jim sold the Q50. He is of course a big fan of the Infiniti Nissan brand because he owns a Pathfinder and an Infiniti. He had an Infiniti Q50 previously, the sedan version of this, and it's still sold for a very good price. So the car, in some ways, it is very, very up to date in many things. You got an all-wheel drive system that is fantastic in snow. You're still getting a 3-liter V6 twin turbocharged engine that if you're looking to tune this thing, you can do that. And it's all-wheel drive, which means that the grip is there for drag races in that case. I've actually thought about buying a Q50 as my daily and maybe getting some sort of performance just to have it for like a weekend car or doing videos, because the car offers so much to this day. I want to talk a bit more about the engine because this engine is very important, especially if you are a Z fan. This VR30 is technically the same engine used in the new Nissan Z. There's some minor differences with the turbos and how the air is pushed through into the engine, but we're not going to get into that detail. What we want to talk about is this 3-liter twin turbocharged engine that makes 400 horsepower. Now, Infiniti offered two spec engines technically. There's a VR30 that makes less horsepower at 300 horsepower, and then there is the bigger one for Red Sport at 400 horsepower. The engine, of course, used an aluminum block. It had aluminum cylinder head, lightweight intake, and of course the lower oil pan. And most importantly, it had an electronically controlled variable displacement oil pump. It used the exhaust hydraulic continuous variable. And in comparison to the Nissan GT-R, the VR38, well, the way this is designed is very different in many ways. First, the displacement is different because this is a 3-liter V6 in comparison to the Nissan GT-R, which has a bigger displacement. But the way the Nissan GT-R engine is designed in comparison to this is that the exhaust manifold is integrated with the turbos. Meanwhile, this one has the turbos bolt directly into the cylinder head. One of the things that I like about the Infiniti, the Q60 specifically, is just how it rides. It might not be the fastest car I've driven. In some ways, it is outdated, of course, we know that. Although the engine is used, the same engine, in the new Nissan Z, the ride is smooth, it's comfortable, it's not too stiff, and it's a good daily car overall. Like if you need, in this case with Jim, for example, who lent us his car, this is his kind of toy, his weekend car. He has a Pathfinder which he uses for his family. In this case, he just used this for his fun time, you know, coming to the drag races with me, taking this on a certain roads for fun, going about, like, you know, you're tired from your work and you're just trying to like chill and enjoy your time and you're a car guy. This is the type of car. And the crazy thing is that you can walk into a store right now, in an Infiniti store, and place an order for a 2023 model. This is a 2022, he got it brand new, which is shocking because Nissan Infiniti, in this case, they say that this car will not be produced anymore. But I'm assuming they have some left, some parts left. So they're just thinking, well, might as well sell some cars. In Sport Plus, with that, oh, it sounds so good. In Sport Plus, with that AAM transmission, this thing is an absolute joy to drive, and it's quick for 2015 standards technically, but even today, it's not bad. Manual transmission is the one reason that keeps this thing behind. Like, it's just, you don't shift, it's quick, but then you want to upshift, it's not as quick, and that's what keeps this thing slow in some ways. The engine, the VR30 on this car, is technically somehow sort of like a baby version of the Nissan GT-R, of the VR38. The difference is, of course, it's a smaller displacement in comparison to the VR38. The turbochargers in this case are not at the same point where the ones in the GT-R are used. So basically the GT-R has a different system with the turbos, the way they're built into the engine in comparison to this. But that VR30 in this thing is still quite capable to, you can bring out some crazy horsepower out of this car if you wanted to. It's just that good. Like we had Gobin with his, and spoiler alert, it was quick. The car was quick. It's just insane. Just a few tunes here and there, and that's it. Like the thing that holds this back is mostly the transmission. It's not necessarily the car, the engine itself, because this is an all-wheel drive. So when it comes to grip, this thing doesn't suffer from it at all. It's really good because it's an all-wheel drive. You can put the power down, it doesn't spin, and that's what makes this such a great option too. Like if you're looking for a used one, you can get one for like 40 to 50 grand, tune it up, play around with it. It's a very good base to start with. Like if you really wanted to tune a car and you couldn't afford a GT-R, for example, and you didn't want the rear-wheel drive version of the Nissan Z, but you want an all-wheel drive, this will be it. Oh, that AAM that AAM exhaust sounds so good. And even in Sport Plus, it's still very comfortable. It's not stiff like some performance cars. Also, what you can do is just basically put it into personal, but let's just put it into standards, kind of like a normal mode, and just enjoy a drive. Now, the exhaust with this specific one, it's kind of loud at the back, but Jim likes it that way. It's kind of sad seeing this car go at this point. It is sad because it's still a very competitive vehicle in some ways. It's very expensive buying used. Like this was probably about $80,000, which is pretty pricey in comparison to the new Z. But what you have to look into is more so the chassis, the engine, the drivetrain, things that really can make this so much faster than it is. Even the transmission, you can tweak that to make it shift faster. And the beautiful thing is that Nissan has included a 6-speed manual with a VR30, which is one thing that people complained about this car, is that it didn't have a 6-speed manual. Now, of course, the Z is a rear-wheel drive, so it's a much easier implementation in comparison to an all-wheel drive drivetrain. To put it in 6-speed manual would be a bit harder. It's a different type of system that requires different technology, different engineering, and so on. A rear-wheel drive base model, it's a little bit easier. But let's not forget, this car was sort of like the little baby, or that generation of the G35 that made Infiniti so popular. I mean, I remember the G35 and still is very popular. There's so many options out there that you can tune. I like this. I still like driving it. I see why Jim bought this. You could say that it's crazy to just walk into a dealership and spend $80,000 on a car that is so outdated in many ways. Now the interior is quite nice still. Like we have 2 screens here. It has Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It has a full 360 camera. It got heated seats in here with this package, which again, it's pretty insane for a car that is so old, like in some ways. And it has sort of like all the bells and whistles, like the infotainment display. It's still very intuitive. You got the map at the top, like you got the next options over here. So it's not fully outdated, but it's what people complain most is like the interior design. It's not up to the standard for 2022 models, for example. Everyone wants those massive screens and behind the steering wheel for the cluster and the infotainment display. What I like about this is how the cluster looks. It's very unique, and it is analog, it's not digital, but it's still a very sporty style in some ways. The ride quality in this car, to me, just makes a huge difference. You can really enjoy driving this as a daily. It's a good vehicle overall. Like if you can get a used one for 50K Canadian, or like $35,000, $40,000 US, that's a lot of car for the money. New, yeah, it is a bit tough, like unless you're a really hardcore fan like Jim is, but other than that, it's not quite justifiable to you to spend $80,000 where you can get so many new options. But it's just sad. The way this thing is just letting, by the Infiniti, is being let go and not really being transformed. Maybe they are and they're hiding it from us, but clearly Infiniti wants to get rid of both the Q50 and the Q60. The brakes in this thing are amazing too. We got big pistons in the front, big pistons in the back. I believe the front were like 4 pistons, 2 pistons at the back. Like it's still up to the current standards in many ways. I like it. I like this thing.